Man, I thought there'd actually be way more difference there. So I really wanted to definitively prove to myself that tone capacitors, different types of tone capacitors actually make a difference. Because around 10 years ago, I was seriously into tone capacitors and the different types and what they do to the sound, until I did a simple blind test and I actually found that I struggled to hear a difference between the different capacitors. Now I have a lot of customers who absolutely swear by certain capacitor types and they insist that I install these in their guitars when I'm working on them. And this has made me want to really revisit this and do it properly. We're going to be using the switcher that I built for that other video that I did. So I'm able to switch between different capacitor types, which are all going to be the same value. So what I've got in here is I've got a 500K audio pot, and I've disconnected the pot inside my guitar. So essentially it's now moved here. And each one of these switches engages a different capacitor. Now all these capacitors are going to be 22 nanofarad, the standard sort of humbucker value. I'm also going to be using a ultra horrible dry console direct tone, just so if there is differences, it's easier to hear. There are two main things I want to test here. The first is the most obvious one, which is, does it sound different? And the second is a little less obvious, but I think it's something a lot of musicians are aware of, they just don't really think about, and how it sort of feels under the fingers. Does it change how it actually feels while you're playing? I'm also going to do a special test at the end where I switch the capacitors in and out silently. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one, just to see if you really can hear a difference, or you're not just sort of seeing the switch move and then hearing the difference, you know, that placebo effect. Okay, so capacitors. First up, we have the classic ceramic capacitor. So I find these a lot in vintage guitars. I find them a lot in vintage amplifiers. They've got a bit of a bad rep. They can be microphonic. They can change value when you heat them up or when they cool down. The next cap are these polyprop caps. I see them a lot in guitar and amp designs. They're a really stable capacitor. They've got a good tight tolerance. So this is going to be interesting to see how they sound. The next one are the classic orange drop capacitor. You would have seen these inside lots of different guitars if you open them up and have a look inside. They're a really good quality capacitor, you know. They sound great. The next one is this Soho Next Gen Blue capacitor. It's a little bit more pricey. So these are a vintage style polyprop capacitor. Lastly, we have the Jupiter Bumblebee paper and oil capacitor. This was a freakishly expensive capacitor. It cost like $30 US. I mean, in New Zealand, you could almost buy a house for that with the exchange rate. But I'm getting really interested to see what this actually sounds like and if it does make a difference, especially the ceramic versus this, if there's actually any difference at all. By the way, there are some really cool videos coming up. I've got a whole host of different ideas this year, different mods and projects. So if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It'd be great to have you on board. Okay, we're just going to do some simple tests. I've got my switcher hooked up. I've got my tone control disconnected, so it's essentially here now on this unit. And each switch is going to switch between the different capacitors. So I've got the ceramic cap, the standard poly film cap, we've got the orange drop, the Soho blue, and the Bumblebee on the end there. And this is with the tone control all the way up to 10. So for me, with the tone control on 10, I couldn't hear anything in the room. They all sounded the same. So it seems like that the cap doesn't matter at all when the tone control's all the way up to 10, or basically off, essentially. So let's move it down to, say, 7. That was also pretty hard to hear for me as well. So let's shift it down a bit more. Let's go to like 5. Okay, let's try all the way off. To be honest, in the room, it's actually still really hard to hear if there is a difference. It might be a lot easier on playback, but it's going to be really subtle. If I pull this back to sort of 5, let's try the difference between the ceramic and the Bumblebee cap. Man, I thought there'd actually be way more difference there. Time for the blind test, so I'm going to strum through a chord progression and silently switch these caps in and out just to see if I can actually hear a difference or not. So there'll be no graphics on screen. I'm just going to cruise through this progression right now. So that was pretty interesting for me. It confirmed my original findings from all those years ago that, for me at least, tone caps don't make enough of a difference for me to be able to pick particular ones to get a certain sound or feel. To me, the sound change was pretty much identical throughout all 5. There was no difference in feel. They all felt exactly the same. So it's really up to you and what you can hear, because something I have found is that just because it's not something that I can hear or I feel is important, it might be really important to you. Something that's important to me is how stuff looks inside a guitar. So I always pick cool looking tone caps just because I like how they look inside the guitar. But for me, it's about the value. The value is the most important thing as far as that roll off goes, that high frequency roll off, because that's all that's really happening. You're just rolling off those high frequencies and letting those lows pass until, well, we can talk about that another time. But the main thing is, if you are thinking about looking for tone caps to improve your tone, I think there are better options elsewhere. It's always good to put good quality tone caps in your guitars, but I don't think you need to spend insane amounts on really expensive tone capacitors, because the differences are either non-existent or so subtle that you can't even tell the difference. Now, I did test all these at the start. They're all testing exactly the same. So there's no variation as far as values go, even though there can be a lot of variation between individual components. Find some tone capacitors, do your own experiments if you want to, and let me know if there are any particular capacitors you have found that you thought were really, really great. But yeah, I think I'm going to continue with my usual orange drops, or those Mojo Tone paper and oil ones look pretty cool. So as far as buying capacitors to enhance the sound of my guitar, it's not really something that I'm going to pursue going forward. But yeah, great test, really stoked I did it. Kind of puts it to bed for me. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'll catch you on the next video. Cheers.